We are recording the interview of John Daws. This interview is being conducted by David Berry from the Wright State University Veteran Voices Project. This interview is being recorded at Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. It is 4 p.m. on September 7th, 2017. So let's begin with where and when were you born?
I was born in a town called Darby, Pennsylvania, August 21st, 1950. I can't tell you the time because I don't remember the time. I was never told what time I was born. I don't know what else you need there.
No, that's about it.
Okay.
What about, who were your parents and what were their occupations?
My father's name was William Daws. He was a carpenter by trade prior to World War II. He was a veteran from World War II. He served in North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and then finally Normandy. And he was on a troop transport heading to Japan when VJ Day was declared. My mother, she was born in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 1915. During the war, she worked for the State Department, and then she married my father. She became a housewife and mother, and then she eventually became a packer for a manufacturing company that I helped get her a job for. That was in 1968, 69.
Who were your siblings?
I have one brother, one sister. My brother was in the Marine Corps. He was born in 1947. He did 4 years in the Marine Corps, 2 tours in Vietnam. He's still alive. Him and I have had a falling out. We don't talk to each other too much for various reasons. My sister, she was born in 1953, and she passed away in 2001 of lung cancer.
Sorry to hear that.
She has 4 siblings, or 4 kids, I should say, not siblings. Those are the only 2 siblings I have.
What were you doing before you entered the service?
I was working at the same manufacturing company that my mother worked with. In fact, I helped get her the job there. I was working in the printing department, and I thought about joining the Marine Corps at that time because I guess it was sibling rivalry with my brother, I guess you may want to call it. But my father refused to sign for me, so I didn't go in the Marine Corps, and I finally just kind of faded out of my mind, so I joined the Air Force instead. And when I joined the Air Force, I became a bomber in the mechanical field. And I joined the Air Force February 24th, 1969. It was my first day of basic training. The day I went basic training, I had to turn my draft card in. 3 days later, my first piece of mail sent to me in basic training was my draft notice. They knew my name, my rank, my serial number, my squadron, my unit, everything before I did, because it was postmarked the same day I left to go to basic training. So, talk about a coincidence? I don't know, but it just turned out that way.
So, just so I understand, were you drafted or did you enlist and then kind of get...
I enlisted, and then when I signed up, took my oath of enlistment, on the plane to basic training, and then my first piece of mail was my draft notice. So technically I enlisted, but I got drafted afterwards.
Okay.
And that did happen before too. My brother, when he was in Nam in his first tour, he got drafted, and the draft board sent him his notice to his FPO number. So they weren't really using the little computers at the time. They didn't really use them. They didn't have them. They had the big ones, but they didn't use the little. They didn't have the little ones. The desktops like we have today. So things just got crossed. And I'm glad they did.
No. Was being drafted part of, or the idea of being drafted, did that help push you into the military at all? Or?
Yes, it did. Like I said, my father was in the Marine Corps, or in the Army, and was pretty patriotic, so I felt it was my duty to join. I didn't want to get drafted. Didn't want to, after ruling out the Marine Corps, I didn't want to go in the Army because I didn't want to be slinging through the mud. The Air Force, at least I'd learn a trade and have 3 hots and a cot. Same with the Navy, so it was a toss-up between the Navy and the Air Force. So I chose the Air Force instead. My uncle, my mother's brother, served in World War II as a gunner in the Army Air Corps. So I guess he kind of pushed me a little bit too. So, and that's how I wound up in the Air Force.
So we started talking about your basic training a little bit. So what happened when you first were leaving for basic training? How did your family feel about it? What did you feel about it?
I was kind of excited but terrified too at the same time, because I was entering an unknown territory. I was excited because I was going to serve my country. My mother, she cried, of course. You know, her youngest son going away, may not come back. You know, my sister, well, she kind of felt the same way as my mom. But I was a little terrified at first, not knowing what to expect. And when I hit basic training, it was like, oh, here's an eye opener, being yelled at for no reason. So then I went through that for 6 weeks, basic training.
Where was that at?
San Antonio, Texas, Lackland Air Force Base. I was with the 3709th BMTS Flight 273. My drill instructor, his name was Tech Sergeant Velasquez. I still remember that after all these years. He was my first role model, you might say, in military life. Although at the time I did not know it, I wound up making a career out of the Air Force.
Did your drill instructor do anything that, I mean, obviously he stands out in your mind to still remember his name?
It was just the way most people, I feel, remember who their drill sergeant was. That's their first role model, and that's the first person who gives them their initiation into the military way of life. And I think anything that sticks out in your lifetime, you remember the most. There was nothing special about him, other than he was about 5'0" nothing. He was Spanish or Hispanic, and after we got through the initial shock and initial treatment, we started doing things in a good way, you know, without being yelled at. He seemed to lighten up a little bit, but he was firm and fair, which I feel is a good quality for an NCO. I felt we could talk to him if we had a problem.
So how was it adjusting to basic and to military life when you first got in?
At first, the first couple of days, it was a little tough. I can't say I wasn't used to being away from home, because I did spend a full year away in a seminary. That was when I was 14. So I can't say I was not used to being away from home. But I think it was just the idea of the rigorous discipline and regimental way of life that I was not used to having at home. Once I got used to that, I had no problem fitting in. I made mistakes like everybody. I got yelled at, chewed out, whatever you want to call it, but I still had a great time. But I don't know if I'd say great time in basic, but overall in my career I had a good time.
So you said that you became a bomb loader.
Correct.
Was that your first training after basic training?
Excuse me. While I was in basic training, we had to go through various testings and stuff for our aptitude. I had joined up under the mechanical area, and I was offered 3 different choices, and munitions was actually being the first one. And I got that, and I was chosen to be a bomb loader. I went to tech school in Denver, Colorado, Lowry Air Force Base. We left there basic training. I graduated basic training in April 1969, and they flew us to Denver. And I was there for 2 weeks before we started school. I had to do KP and various other details before we got actually started in school. So I was in Denver for a total of 3 months. The schooling was 10 weeks long. And we went through various phases of the aircraft, electronics, mechanical portions, how to load the aircraft, both for conventional weapons and nuclear. They didn't really go into detail so much, because that was going to be taught more on the job. They gave us an overview, except for the electronics portion that was somewhat a little bit more in detail. So not having a mechanical or an electrical background, I kind of struggled with that. But I managed to squeak through the electronic portion, and I graduated with everybody in the class.
So, was being a bomb loader kind of what you wanted to do in the Air Force?
I wanted to be in the mechanical field. Being a bomb loader, I didn't really give it any thought, because I figured, okay, I'll go in for 4 years, get out, get some training elsewhere through the VA, through the GI Bill, and then move into something else that I wanted to do. I had not any idea what I wanted to do at that time, so bomb loading to me was fine. I did the best I could, progressed as well as I could. Big rank is just like normal, anybody else would. Excuse me. And I got assignments elsewhere. My first assignment was Daws Air Force Base in Abilene, Texas, with a 96 bomb wing, working B-52s. The unit I was assigned to was the 42nd MMS, which is Munitions Maintenance Squadron. And I went through various stages of training to learn how to do my job, both loading the weapon and unloading it, of course, and fixing the equipment. The trailers that we used, we did periodic maintenance on them. We tore them apart, put them back together, make sure they work right. Otherwise, you couldn't do your job. A lot of our, in order to do the job of loading the bombs, you had to have functional equipment. You couldn't do it by hand. They just weighed too much. Some weighed several thousand pounds. Some weighed 25 pounds.
So, where did you go after Texas?
I left Texas. I got there in July of 1969, and I left there in February 1970. I got an assignment to Kadena Air Base in Okinawa. And there I was loading iron bombs, conventional bombs, 750 pounders and 500 pounders. I was chosen to be what they call a jammer driver. I drove an MJ-1 bomb lift truck. My responsibility was to drive that truck into what they call the dunnage, or the flatbed trailer, where the bombs were stored. Pick one up at a time, wait till they strapped it down for safety measures, and drive it over to where we were putting it on, to the position on of the aircraft where the two-man, it was a 5-man load crew, the 2-man would guide it up in there, and I would just operate the levers to raise and lower the table. And depending on the size of the weapon would depend on whether we did the internals or the externals. Normally we loaded 750 pounders on the internal, and we did them one at a time. And normal length for the aircraft, the load was about 2.5 hours. And that's from start to finish, from the time we got to the aircraft until we actually pulled away. And that involved opening the bomb bay doors to a full open position, which is kind of hard. I was mentioning a dog bone earlier. That helps hold the doors in a wide open position, which are not normally that far out. During a normal bomb run, they just hop the bottoms and then the bombs fall. And we had them way up, like little umbrellas on the side, you might say. So they gave us the extra room to get up in there.
Is there anything that sticks out in your mind during your deployment to Japan? Any of the food, or the culture? Or?
Well, the culture was a little bit of a shock. The like downtown was like something like out of the Old West. It was something I wasn't used to. But I quickly adjusted to it. The people were nice, although I was told by my father to be very cautious of them. Because the island at the time when I was there was still under American rule, and I was there in 1970. The end of 1970, which was the end of the 25-year occupation of the U.S. of Japan, we still kind of like governed everything. They had figureheads, but we were in charge. At the end of 1970, reverted back to Japanese rule. But I was told not to come home with a Japanese wife and don't trust them. And my father has that feeling, and my father did too, because of Pearl Harbor. which was understandable.
Alright.
I like the people I talked to, the people I met. You know, I got to know them a little bit. Would I trust them? I don't know. But I do know that during my career, I spent 3 tours overseas, and all 3 of them were in Asia. So,
What was the next tour you did?
when I left Okinawa, I left SAC, which is Strategic Air Command. I went to Air Defense Command, to F-106 fighter jet, Delta Darts. Totally new aircraft, one I'd never worked on, never seen before. And it was a 3-man load crew. It was a totally different aircraft, one I still know but like the back of my hand. Easy to learn, very easy to load. It was a 3-man load crew, took 15 minutes to load. The entire aircraft, 15 minutes, period. And that's quick. And I enjoyed doing that. The only thing I didn't like about him was changing out the -1 valve, the air valve. Because the system was pneumatic over hydraulics. And when the -1 valve, which was mostly the pneumatic air system, I hated to change that out because you had a box about this big coming out of a box, a hole this big. Almost impossible to get out. And you're up there sometimes just feeling around, you can't see up in there. That was the only thing I didn't like about it. But I enjoyed working that aircraft. Even when we spent 3 months troubleshooting a problem, and everything was pointing to the missile intervalometer, and the manufacturer said, no, that's not it. We changed out the missile intervalometer, and the system worked fine. I left Michigan. There was a place called Wordsmith, Michigan at the time. I re-enlisted. After 2.5 years, they offered me a chance to re-enlist early, and I said sure, and I took it. Because I knew there really wasn't nothing outside, on the outside for me. And that was in 71. I'm sorry, 72 I took the, 71 I took the re-enlistment. And I requested a transfer of the bases. I went to Dover, Delaware with another 106 outfit. I chose that because it was only 75 miles from home. And while there, I was processing in Senior Master Sergeant Rogers, who was there, that was his name. He says, Johnny, when you left Wordsmith, did you ever have this problem? They had the same problem. And they were troubleshooting it for like 2 weeks, and I says, I bet it's the missile intervalometer, isn't it? He says, everything pointing to it. I said, change it out. He says, he told me the same thing we already tried. I says, we've done that, and we've been there, and it worked. So they did, and they had no problem. While there, they chose me to help represent them in their weapons competition team, on their loading team for weapons competition called William Tell, which is held annually among fighter jets, fighter pilots, or down at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. Our average load time prior to practice was like 15 minutes, as I told you before. We got it down to 7, and that's fully loaded. That's doing it by the book from step 1 all the way through. That's pretty quick. So, but unfortunately, we didn't come in first place. We came in 3rd. After that, I left there and went to Thailand. And that was in March of '73. I arrived in Utapao, Thailand. And I was also engaged at the time. I stayed in Utapao. I started in the loading section. And then when the war was starting to wind down in August of '73, they put me up in the squadron safety office because they didn't know what to do with all the loaders at the time. Some went to preload, some went to just hanging out in the shop, whereas before we were always on the flight line. But they put me up in squadron safety, and my job at that time was to make sure everything was done in a safe and reliable manner. And unfortunately, I became one of the hated guys. Safety always was a hated individual role because we can get away with this when nobody's watching. Get it done quicker, which is what we did during all the heavy bombing loading. And now we have to go back to peacetime. It's like, okay, you gotta do it now this way, and if you don't do it, you're gonna get written up. Well, they see safety pull up, they say, oh, shoot. You know? So, I didn't mind doing that job. It was nice, but I wouldn't want to do it a second time. I'd rather be on the flight line, where my days are busy and I have to go home tired. I'm tired because I actually busted my butt. You know, not because I'm driving around all day. When I left Thailand, I went to Seymour Johnson Air Force Base in North Carolina. And just for the record, I did 20 years in the military. That's why there's so many assignments. There I was, again, in the weapons loading section. And on B-52s again. And we had to learn through training various loading techniques for different weapons. And nothing much really occurred there other than just normal day-to-day operations, loading flights, getting flights ready for their runs. I was only there 2 years, and I volunteered for special duty to become a recruiter. I spent 12 weeks in San Antonio, Texas for recruiting. I think it was 12 weeks. Then I was assigned to up to Newark, New Jersey, where I recruited. I didn't want to be recruiting in Pennsylvania because of taxes, so state taxes. So I recruited in New Jersey, and I did okay there. Actually, I became a top recruiter a couple of times for the Marine Corps and the Army because applicants weren't qualified for the Air Force, but they still wanted to go in. So I took them over to the individual branches and introduced them to the recruiter there, and they just kind of recognized it later. Nothing official, but they said that you were top recruiter, helping them make their quota. And I made top recruiter several months in a row. Then I had some personal problems, and I requested transfer back to the Air Force, back to my career field. Normally, a recruiter duty is 4 years. After 2 years, I requested transfer back. They gave me the transfer back, but they didn't like my performance review at that time was not the greatest, but it wasn't real bad. So, and they couldn't really give me a bad one because I was also top recruiter of the month for the Air Force. So they gave me a good APR, but APR is performance review. Then I was transferred from there back up to Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire with the 509th Bomb Wing. There, I went into working on FB-111s, another aircraft altogether, still SAC though, back to SAC. And I enjoyed that aircraft. I still knew that one like almost like the back of my hand. I got to know the different systems on that aircraft. I was there a year and a half, and I got a reassignment to Kunsan Air Base in Korea. And there, instead of working on F-4s, they needed somebody working disaster preparedness for their squadron. And so I had no choice. I was a new guy, you know, so they stuck me up there. And it was an E5 slot, and I was an E5, so. And normally that position is a additional duty, but because of the size of the squadron and the job that we're doing there, it had to be a permanent position. It couldn't be part-time. So that's why they chose me to be there. They knew I could do it. And I revamped the whole system for them. Made sure everybody got their training. I was in contact with the base disaster preparedness office, squadron commander, and he didn't know what the heck was going on other than the fact that these guys are all getting trained now, and we had to issue the chemical warfare gear, and I had to explain all that to her. Up until that point, she was kind of like, not in the dark, but she says, go ahead and take care of what you got to do. Kind of gave me somewhat free rein. But I had to report to her, which was not a problem, and she was a lieutenant colonel at the time. I don't know what rank she is now. She was still a lieutenant colonel when I left. But we revamped the whole system, and I guess she liked it well enough she awarded me a commendation medal. And I left there in January of '82. Went back to Pease Air Force Base. I knew I was coming back to Pease because of a program they call home basing. I had an assignment back to Pease before I even left. So, went back to Pease. I'm no longer an E5, I'm now an E6, so my status changed as far as position. I'm no longer on a load crew, I'm now shift supervisor. And during that same course of time frame, I was there from 82 until my retirement in 89. I was promoted, so to speak, given a different position. A couple of times I was promoted from shift supervisor to assistant shop superintendent, where I went from just 2 or 3 load crews on a shift to the entire shop, which was 14 load crews. So you're talking 90 people. I was the assistant to the NCYC. That's the non-commissioned officer in charge. And then my last 2 years there, I was offered a position for branch production supervisor, which my job was to coordinate getting the aircraft so we could work on them, anything broken, with job control, which was for the base job control, and the other organizations, as well as the wing commander, deputy commander for maintenance, so that we can get the aircraft fixed and make it ready in case we had to go to war. Otherwise, it would be just flying holes in the sky. And then I retired in March of '89 after 20 years. And that's what I did. And then in 1991, I had a telegram. Pack your bags for possible recall. So that was because of Desert Storm. Desert Shield first, and then Desert Storm. But I never got a call. No, next telegram said stand down, and basically standing down since. And I've been enjoying myself since.
Oh, that's good.
And I know that if they want me to go back in, I would. I'd do it in a heartbeat if I was able to pass it medically. And as you can tell, because of the oxygen, I can't do it medically. And since then, I had a few things happen. I lost my spleen, so that rules me out medically also. But if I had the opportunity, I'd go back in a heartbeat and do it all over again. So I don't know how much more you need.
Oh, I mean, you gave me quite a bit. I'll just ask you a couple questions,
Sure.
though. When you were coming back from your deployments, or when you were done with...
They weren't deployments, they were change of stations.
Oh, okay. Is that different for the Air Force, or was it just because of
Air
where...
Force calls it PCS, Permanent Change of Station.
Okay.
It's not a deployment. A deployment to the Air Force would be like a TDY, a temporary duty assignment. That could last up to 6 months. Anything more than 6 months, it's considered a change of assignment or change of station.
Oh, okay.
I went permanently. I was no longer assigned to that last unit. So I was now assigned to the next unit. That's the change. That's the difference between a regular deployment. Deployment, you move your whole unit.
Okay.
If I'm understanding it right. That's the way I understand the deployment. I never had a deployment, so.
Oh, okay. I'm just, for me, when I was in, it was kind of, if you went overseas, that was the deployment. If you went to a combat zone or anywhere dangerous, we kind of
It's just different terminology, but
Yeah.
still the same thing. We call it PCS movement, permanent change of station.
We still call it PCS if we were moving in the States, or within the States.
We call it PCS no matter where. So.
Okay. So when you were coming back from your duty stations overseas, how were you received by your friends, family, and community?
Family welcomed me back home. I really didn't have any problems coming back until '74, and that was in San Francisco. I was spit on, called baby killer. And I don't know how they consider us. I was in the service other than by my short hair because I was in civilian clothes. Did it bother me? Yes, it did. It bothered the hell out of me. I wanted to punch the son of a bitches right in their mouth. Excuse my language. Knock them on their ass. But I restrained myself. I just kept walking. I had another flight to catch. I wanted to get home. So, and I didn't want to get arrested there, not knowing anybody in San Francisco. So, that was the only problem I really had. When I came back from Korea in 81 or 82, my wife met me at the airport, not a problem. When I came back from Korea, Okinawa, I had no problems. Came back in uniform. Everybody said, hey, how you doing? Welcome home. The only time, like I said, was in 74, and that was because of Vietnam. Even though that was winding down, there still had all the protests and stuff.
Yeah. That's very unfortunate that that's how
Yeah,
our country was.
No, there was no fanfare for us either, other than my family. You know, and that's one of the things our group has already said. Not our group, but other groups have said, never again will that happen to a returning soldier or airman or whoever. It won't happen again. You'll be greeted and with honors. So,
And I can attest to that. When I came back, I was not spit on, or I did get called a baby killer once, but that was just being in Myrtle Beach.
so, yeah, and I'm sure that hit you kind of hard too.
I was pretty drunk at the time, so I was able to keep myself from getting in trouble. But
yeah, it hit me. I felt kind of, I was over there doing my job. I didn't kill anybody that I know of anyway. I put the bombs on the airplanes, right? The pilots took it where they had to go.
So where were you when the war ended, the Vietnam War?
I was back here in the States in 75 when it officially ended. I was in Seymour Johnson in North Carolina. I came back in 74. The war still had another year to go, although our involvement as far as bombing in Vietnam was over. That ended in 73. However, our total involvement didn't end until 75, if I remember correctly, because I think the last guy that was killed in Vietnam was 17, and he was a Marine. He was a embassy guard. I think he was killed in 75 when they were pulling out. So in 75, I was back here in the States, waiting for my daughter to be born. She was born a year. I got back in 74, got married in 74. My father passed away the day after I got home. I did get to see him, though. We had a drink together. He was already laying in bed. Pretty much, he says, I ain't supposed to drink, but he says, over there's a pint. So we had a drink together, and that was the last time we talked. And then he passed away later that night. In fact, he was supposed to have been dead prior to that. As I found out later, I talked to his doctor, and he was supposed to have been dead 6 months before. And he says, I'm not going to die until my son comes home. So, anyway, he waited. So.
So how has it been readjusting to civilian life?
At first, it was a little difficult. For 20 years, I'm used to this discipline and regimen, telling people what to do, and having them do it, And I'm out in the civilian world, and it's like, who the hell are you? And I'm not used to it. And I thought about requesting from the Secretary of the Air Force at that in 1990 to be reinstated, but I never followed through on that. I eventually readjusted to everything, got used to doing they wanted things done, and I just kind of like fell into place. And eventually, when I had the authority, I eventually incorporated some military ways of doing things into my own way. And it turned out fine. You just had a matter of time of waiting for the right time.
So that what have you been doing since you've been out?
Well, I had a couple I was a security guard for a while. Then I drove auto parts around. Then I became an assembler for an orthopedic implant manufacturer, making implants and surgical instruments for every bone in the human body. And then while I was there, after I was there for 3 years, I put in for quality control, quality assurance, and until I retired from there in 2014, I was quality control. I was a quality control for like 11, 12 years. Went from a regular inspector to a senior inspector. Was a shift supervisor for a while. And as I said, we make parts for just about every part in the body. In fact, the senator from Arizona, Gabrielle Gifford, when she was shot, they had to replace part of her skull. Otherwise, she wouldn't be around today. That part was made by our company. And we just manufactured it to the doctor's specifications and sent it back to them. And it passed all our inspections, so he finished it up and put it in her skull, and she's alive today. But then in 2012, the owner, the company who owned it, the person who owned it, it was one private owner. He started it in the United States in 1975. Excuse me. He took it from a little company in Exton, Pennsylvania to a worldwide corporation. And when he sold it in 2012, he sold it to Johnson & Johnson for $26.3 billion. And 90% of that was cash. Because everything was, according to their balance sheets that were made public, approximately 10% of his holdings were liabilities. Everything else was all assets. He owned all the buildings worldwide, all the equipment. His liabilities basically were, payroll, insurance, utilities, property taxes, and stuff like that. So, and I went home from work one day, and I got an envelope from the company. And I opened it up, and I was sitting down, thank goodness. There was a check in it, 5 figures. He gave people who were with him prior to March of 1999 a bonus check out of his own pocket. And my wife, who's now my wife now, my current wife, she says, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'm fine." She says, "What's that? How much is that check for?" I says, "You better sit down." And I showed her, and she says, "Yeah, I think I should be." Thank goodness I was sitting down because, like I said, it was for 5 figures. It was 5 figures after taxes.
Oh.
So he gave everybody a pretty decent check who was with him.
That's good.
Yeah. And some guys who got hired one day after that cutoff were upset. And I retired from them in 2014 and kind of just mulled around the house, did little things here and there. And then recently I went back to work part-time. I take driver's license photos for the state of Pennsylvania. And I kind of like it. It's easy work. It's sit down work. Just point and click on the computer. And there we go.
Oh, there you go.
And that's how I found out some of these kids today, they really need to learn cursive. They need to put that back in the schools.
I heard the typewriter killed the cursive, or the keyboard killed cursive.
Yeah, the computer keyboard did. And I was talking to one young man, 16, just getting his driver's license for the first time. He printed his name. And his mom says, "Did you sign your name?" He says, "No, I printed it." She says, "You're learning cursive, and I'm going to start teaching you." And kids can't read it. It's a dying form. And what's going to happen is people like yourself and I who can read cursive, we're going to have a code system that these kids aren't going to know. Just write something out in code, Plenty of the day for you and I. So, but yeah, that's what I've been doing for the last few months. I hooked up with the UTAPAL group a couple of years ago on Facebook. I went to my first reunion last year in Tucson, Arizona, and this is my second year.
Great.
And it's a great group of people. We've all experienced the same kind of thing at different times, but still, we've experienced it.
Oh, that's great. Is there anything you feel like we haven't discussed or should be added to this interview?
I can't think of anything at this time. I don't know anything that you might have added, we could add or take away from it. I know I was happy to help you out here.
Oh yeah, thank you very much.
It made me think a lot about what I've done. got a little emotional.
That's okay
But,
then.
that's about it. I really can't think of anything else.
All right. Well, I just have one more question then for you. What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view this interview?
I think you should take what I have to say to you, as well as other veterans who have other interviews, and make your own judgments, both about military, your way of life, but make it the best decision that you can. I made mine, and mine was for the military, for our life. I'm not saying go in the military, but I'm not telling you not to either. By all means, protect your country if you have to. Don't be afraid to stand up for your rights and do what you got to do. That's all I got.
That's great. Well, this concludes our interview. I just want to say thank you for taking the time to do this interview,
You're welcome.
and thank you for your service.
You're quite welcome. My pleasure.